and then I will give the screen to you, if that's okay. Yeah, can I do it like this? You can take it out. Yeah, clear. Thanks. Yeah, can we start or? All right. Welcome everyone to this evening's Berlage Keynote by Formafantasma, a research-based design studio founded in 2009, by Andrea Trimarchi and Simone Farresin. The Berlage Keynotes is an ongoing lecture series featuring internationally prominent architects, designers, and thinkers. This is weird to look at myself and be in the room at the same time, so who are at the forefront of design discourse and innovation. This semester, a selection of speakers working from different disciplinary perspectives and in different geographic, cultural, and political contexts present how their work engages with contemporary issues and debates. Formafantasma investigates the ecological, historical, political, and social forces shaping today's design discipline. Working from their studios, now mostly based in Milan and Rotterdam, the practice embraces a broad spectrum of typologies and methods, from product design and spatial design to strategic planning and design consultancy. The studio aims to facilitate a deeper understanding of both our natural and built environments, proposing transformative interventions through design and the possibilities of materiality, technicality, sociality, and discursiveness. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have Formafantasma here, and maybe we will receive a cameo appearance by their lovely dog. So, or maybe not. So, the screen is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for mentioning our lovely dog. Well, the presentation was already quite eloquent, but maybe I should mention that a lot of our practice is also I would say, a commercial practice. So we're not working in an academic environment. So when we work with many of our clients, we try to push a sort of a ecological discourse, or at least an ecological concern, but that is not always happening, or we cannot always afford to be as radical as we would wish with the work we do when we receive commissions. Nonetheless, because of this, also our interest is in developing also self-initiated projects that could allow us to explore some of the subjects we are most interested in. And that's also the reason why we are also heading a department called Geodesign at Design Academy in Eindhoven, because we think that also via education we can explore ideas beyond what we can do in our own private studio, but also in conversation with other practitioners. So to illustrate or to introduce what we do, we decided to not focus on an array of different projects, rather to focus on one of our latest long-term investigation, which was presented in its first installment in the form of an exhibition at Serpentine Galleries in London, but it is also expanding beyond it. So we never seen the exhibition space as a moment of unveiling of an outcome, but possibly specifically also in the case of Serpentine as a moment of departure for a long-term investigation. And I will now share the screen. There you go. So I want to frame the project I'm introducing you, which is called Cambio, within the commission that we received from Serpentine Galleries in London, from its artistic director, Azure Cobrist, who asked us to use the possibility of showing our work in Serpentine Galleries, not really as a moment of displaying products or objects, which was not in any case what we were interested in doing, but to rather show a way of thinking and operating as designers. On the side note, I should say that me and Andrea, we have been trained many, many years ago in Florence in industrial design, and later in the Netherlands in the Design Academy in Eindhoven. But our background is industrial design. And when we received this commission from Serpentine Galleries, we thought it was extremely pertinent because it could have allowed us to include in the exhibition space voices of practitioners beyond our own practice that are generally not part of the design discourse. But let's first talk about the subject we decided to introduce with the exhibition, which we could describe it as an investigation into the governance of the timber industry. So many people described the exhibition we did a serpentine in our project, an investigation into wood, but it is not what this work is about. We are not here looking into wood from its material and functional properties. Rather, we are interested in understanding which are the politics, the forces, the shape in the industry, the one that extract timber from forests, that is, of course, having a huge impact in what we do as designers, or in your case, as architects and so on. But let's also focus on the reason why we decided to address this subject. Of course, it was in our own interest to look into timber because of the reason we just mentioned, the dramatic impact that this industry has in our own practice on a daily basis, but also because the Serpentine Gallery, not far from where in 1851 the Great Exhibition took place. And as you all know, this is an exhibition that shaped the idea that we have of industrial design in the contemporary time, designed by Joseph Paxton. But the reason why we're mentioning this, it's because what we thought was interesting, reflecting on the Great Exhibition, is that this event really, as I mentioned, created a completely different understanding, I think, at least in Europe and in the Western world, of what industrial design is. The event, in fact, was displaying means of production, industrial means of production, together with material samples and outcomes, creating an immediate link between the new means of production, the expertise of designers and craftsmen, and exploitation of resources. We want to focus on this specific aspect. What we think is interesting about the Great Exhibition is that it was clear from this exhibition that there was a very deep conversation between the new means of production and the exploitation of resources outside of the European continent in other than European countries through processes of imperialism and colonialism. So we thought this was extremely interesting because it seems that since the beginning, the practice of industrial design was shaped on this deep conversation between material extraction and transformations of materials. And it had an impact, probably many of you know, that with the selling of the tickets of the Great Exhibition, the Victorian Albert Museum, which was and it still is a gigantic study collection, the Queen Victoria asked to the curator of the Great Exhibition to reform the school of the kingdom, the artistic school of the kingdom, and turning them in applied arts. So to ask artists to not focus only on the forms of self-expression, but also to be trained to transform materials into objects through industrial production. So you can understand that here the Great Exhibition is the moment in which not only industrial design is for the first time, I would say, on a grand stage presented, but it is also almost theorized. And also when, I guess, it also shaped the idea that we all have on how to present industrial design in an exhibition. But I want to focus also on another aspect of the Great Exhibition. And I'm sorry for the extensive introduction, but I think this helps you to understand where we came from when we decided to take this sort of thinking within Serpentine Galleries. And it's, of course, the architecture of Paxton. We think there is something interesting about it, and not on a technical level. You know, it is a great architecture, essentially of glass and steel, which really created the idea of modern architecture, I would say. But at the same time, it makes use of a typology, the one of the greenhouse, that for the first time, it's not used anymore for the livelihood and the well-being of vegetal beings, plants and trees. Rather, it becomes a glass box, a cage to display industrial design. And again, we think it is almost symbolic that Paxton, who was a horticulturist, became an architect in a way. And then suddenly the trees, which were the subject of greenhouses, are here becoming a form of decoration. They are somehow marginalized, or they become simply material samples, as you will see later in the presentation, for craftsmen, producers, designers to appropriate and transform into objects. It's from these premises that the exhibition started to be conceived, really with the wanting of almost focusing, at least on a symbolic level, on these marginalized trees and putting them center in the stage, and focusing on really understanding which is the infrastructure that shape the industry of timber extraction nowadays. To do this, we constructed the exhibition in a conversation and collaboration with a variety of different practitioners from the scientific world, from the world of activism, philosophy, institutions such as the Kew Gardens in London and the Turing Institute in Germany, and NGOs. This because we, in fact, wanted to, as I said at the beginning, embrace voices that generally are not part of the design conversation, in the belief that understanding the infrastructure that shapes such an important industry might allow us as designers to make more informed choices when we design, or to be more critical also of our own role, which extractions of materials and in transformation in desirable goods. The opening of the show was with this tree trunk in a bowl, and we thought this was a pertinent starting point because you could see at the same time the product, timber, and you can still read the creature, the living creature, which is the tree. And we thought this was a good starting point, also because the exhibition touches upon also this the complex ethical questions that entails working with living beings. I also want to say that the title of the exhibition, Cambio, or the project Cambio, more than the exhibition, refers to a scientific term, which is the cambial layer or cambium, which is a few cellular and transfer it to the inside. It's almost like a transfer of knowledge. And this cambial layer is what helped the tree to plants, not the tree, sorry, plants to develop an armor when they were threatened by climate changes and turn them into trees. So wood, it's something that plants created to protect themselves from climate changes. So because of all these different reasons, and also because that we are Italian, even if we have been based in Holland for a very long time, cambio in Latin or in Italian also means change. And in a way, the exhibition is, if not advocating, at least hoping for a different approach to this industry. The opening of the show was also accompanied by 2 films that immediately address the climate concern or the ecological concern of the exhibition, with the first collaboration with a dendroclimatologist from the University of Padua, which extracted a coring from a felled tree from Val di Fiemme, which is a valley in Italy that we featured in the film, where a few years ago a storm blew away in one night 14 million trees because of course, the climate changes. And the dendroclimatology is a science that studies climate changes according to information that you can extract from tree rings. Of course, it's a comparative science. And what we, in the sense, you compare contemporary data with archival data. And in the film, you could see a coring being extracted from a tree from this valley. And we looked into the lifetime of a single tree, how much the temperature in the Alps has changed, which is quite dramatic to see. So we wanted to, of course, put in conversation the film, the documentary about the destructions in Val di Fiemme and how the climate has changed in the area, and introduce the first collaboration with one of the scientists we work with. This was also a pertinent film because we decided to produce all the exhibition design of the show using wood from this valley, because what is extremely important in this moment is removing trees from the forest before they rot, because the quantities of trees are sanitary problems for the remaining forest. The opening of the show also featured a work that she worked with smell, with scent, actually with smell. She created some specific smells in the space that recall the smell that you have in that forest that has been destroyed. We thought it was somehow interesting to be immersed in a very familiar smell, the one of a forest of pine trees. But looking at this film, you would understand that even this familiarity we are all attached to, most probably, at least in Europe, is in this moment threatened. These are some images of what happened in the valley there, and this is the coring we talked about before. So the first part of the exhibition is really almost focusing on extracting data and information you can obtain from wood. So observing wood from really up close on a microscopic level. This tower of objects is a repetition, a copies. Yeah, these are copies of a famous tool of IKEA that we have been reproducing with different typologies of timber species. That has different densities. And with the help of some experts, we calculated the amount of CO2 contained in the wood of each stool, and we made a comparison to the lifetime that the object should have in order to allow that the object should reach before to be discarded, in order to allow a tree to grow back, to compensate the re-emission in the atmosphere of the CO2 contained and stored into the wood in the moment it's discarded. As you all probably know, the 45%, more or less 45% of CO2, of the mass of wood is essentially CO2. So wood is an extremely great carbon sink, but it also means that wood needs to be conserved, that it needs to be kept as long at least as another tree takes to grow to reach maturity. So this means that basically a stool in oak would at least need to leave a critique on the business model, such as in the discardability of their products. But at the same time, it is also providing eventually even like inspiration for possible briefs on how to rethink businesses models or in furniture or other products. The other installations, instead of focusing, this one was an installation focusing on the idea of CO2 contained in objects. So it was extending this one with the papers packaging. The first idea is presented in the one with the tools of IKEA. While on the wall, we have a forensic investigation that we conducted in the course of the 2 years with the support of creation of the exhibition of the Tuning Institute in Germany, where we collected objects within the European Union. And we asked them to make analysis on the timber specimens used in these objects and to compare them to what the seller or the exporter declared in the papers for the importation of these objects in European Union. Many of these objects were, of course, rightly declared and used, timber species which are not endangered, but many others were illegal, were using illegal wood. And many of these objects were music instruments that, because of tradition, still use very endangered tropical specimens, but also you could find really bizarre objects such as charcoal for barbecue containing many tropical samples of trees, or even like a plate from Muji being mislabeled. So it was still using a legal timber, but it was mislabeled, which means that the people from which Muji acquires their wood are not really reliable, and it should be better checked in their custody, in their chains of custody. So it was a way to understand, how also the idea of legality is constructed, and who are the institutions who are actually providing these informations. Here are some images of the conversation we had with the Tuning Institute in Germany, who were kindly enough to support us in this process. And we continued this investigation also on paper, because one of the biggest industry in this moment is not really a timber extraction for building and furniture or other wood-based product, but actually the paper industry it's huge also for the increase of use of packaging because of shipments. And what we asked, the title of the installation is On the Origin of the Species, which is the famous book of Charles Darwin. And we asked colleagues from all over the world to send us copies of books from Charles Darwin, but they were printed in the same country, so not printed somewhere else and then imported. And we sampled the papers, we made them analyze to actually track the origin of the species, in fact, from which the book is produced, in the attempt to understand if there is still a relationship between the place a book is produced or an object is produced and the ecosystem in there. Of course, we could argue that this is not a really sort of a precise forensic investigation, because, of course, again, we don't know if a book produced, for instance, in Italy, has been made with paper produced in Italy. Most probably the paper has been imported. But in any case, some interesting data has emerged. For instance, that the majority of papers from very different publications, from very different publishers from all over the world, they were essentially produced with very few specimens, essentially eucalyptus and pine originally from Norway. And even a state like Brazil, which is a large exporter of paper pulp, still was making use of these two specimens for the productions of paper pulp, which means that these species, one from Norway and the other original from New Zealand and Australia, are actually changing completely the ecosystem in the tropical areas, specifically in Brazil. But of course, the exhibition, when it moves in space, it also moves in perspective, and I would say also it moves geographically. And the installation connected to this presentation, bear in mind, I'm going to show you not all the content of the exhibition, but a few key elements, where these material samples actually from the Great Exhibition, the 51. So in a way, we go back to our starting point. And you might argue, how is this installation connected to what we've seen so far? Well, it is connected because the countries that can allow themselves to make this forensic analysis on timber specimens to understand if they are legal or not when they enter the European Union. And bear in mind, European Union introduced this idea of legality of timber only in 2014. Which means that importers before could basically import whatever they wanted, apart from a very limited amount of past, such as England and of course Germany, the Netherlands, and so on. We decided to feature these specific specimens because, as I said before, the countries that can allow themselves to make this analysis, they need a comparative database. And the countries that owns this database are, of course, countries with a colonial past. And we focus on in the exhibition on these samples from the Great Exhibition of the 51, because also what we said before, through the selling of the tickets, the Victorian Albert Museum was founded, and also the Kew Garden Xylarium, which is from where we took these samples, that has been founded essentially with these material samples that were exhibited in the Great Exhibition. So it's almost as if in the same moment, a study collection was created with wonderful furniture, and at the same time, a xylarium, which was called historically, and still nowadays it is called in this way, for the people who doesn't know, a xylarium is basically a library of wood. It was called the Economic Botany Collection. So it's a collection which, since the beginning, had economic purpose. It was a material library, basically. And we did the film accompanying this installation, where we feature in parallel films, scenes from the archive in the Kew Gardens, the archive in the Victorian Albert Museum. So we considered both tools for design, in a way, one study collection, the other material samples, and a last intervention in the film, where we introduced a contemporary archive, which is a digital one. What we did is downloading from online plugins for different rendering programs, specifically for Keyshot, containing tropical specimens. Actually, if not fully endangered, at least they shouldn't be easily contemplated as rendering surfaces for digital programs that allow us to design whatever we hope to transfer in reality. Of course, again, this is a critique on how much tools can inform the way we have even of thinking and intending design. And we have like sort of historicized tools, the study collection and the material samples of the Economic Botany collection, and a contemporary one, a digital one. Of course, this you can interpret as a critique, as I said, but also you can extract from it a design brief. You know, how can we rethink and redesign the tools that we use to create our architectures, design outcomes, and products to allow us for different kinds of renderings, not only of surfaces, but information regarding what we are actually developing. The exhibition inevitably here, it starts to move also geographically, more, I would say, to the south. And it was important for us also to implement in the exhibition the voices of sort of non-Western culture that might have different ways of interpreting the ecosystem that we work with. And more specifically, we work with an NGO called Gaia Amazonas, based in Colombia, who is helping indigenous communities in the Colombian Amazon to track their territories for developing of maps that could be politically recognized for the protection of their territories, because protecting the cultures, indigenous communities theirs means also protecting the forests. And in the installation, we overlap these mappings over other form of mapping from Rotterdam, Brazil, which is a project of the Brazilian government developed in the 70s to map using laser technologies the Amazon. The reason why we wanted to overlap these two different languages, two different ways of intending mappings, it's because one represented an extremely technocratic view of the forest, and the other one that sees the forest as much more about the relationship between humans, plants, and animals. As you can see, even like on an aesthetic level, the mappings are completely different. But there is also another reason why we wanted to have this overlapping, because in this section of the exhibition, we really dive more deeply into the struggles that there is in creating governance for natural elements that by nature are transnational. So what I think it is interesting about the mappings of the communities Gaia's Amazonas are working with is that when they are asked to define their territories, their understanding of the territory is not geopolitical, but it is based on the understanding of the environment as a biome. So a community in Colombia, for instance, draw the territory extending till Brazil because they follow the trajectory of a river. And I think this is extremely important because to mention, because it shows a completely different mindset that, as I said, it's based on the understanding of the complexity of natural resources. And this reflection links well to the sort of the ending of the exhibition, the feature, the film that we developed with a philosopher, but also the work with a professor, Philip Patberg, who is he's interested, or he's working with transnational governance in the Anthropocene. He's working in Amsterdam, and we asked him to draft three, you could argue three provocations, but I would say they are three speculative documents that tries to do what never happened, to create hypotheses of different ways of creating governance for forests on a national, on a transnational or international level, and even with the most, I would say, radical paper, thinking of a universal declaration of the rights of trees. And the reason why we wanted to address this, to think about the rights of trees, it's because, of course, when you think about trees, we have in front of us creatures that provide not only timber, but they also provide, with forest environments for biodiversity. They provide oxygen, they provide services in maintaining the land. And in this sense, when we went to Philip, we thought the first two things we told him is we would like to do a project, or we would like to, with the collaboration with you, to talk about to look at trees not anymore as only living creatures, but also as laborer, because we think this could be an interesting legislative way of thinking, to do not think them only as living creature, which is something that is, it's not a novelty, the way of thinking or providing laborer. But he said we cannot do that yet, because of course we don't have the universal declaration of the rights of trees as we have for humans. This was linking, I think, extremely well with the end of the exhibition, which was a film, which was an animation that we developed using LiDAR, which is a technology that you probably also know. It is also used to scan objects such as architectures, but it is also used to scan forests, to do selective logging. So to decide from the scan of the forest, which are the trees that should be extracted, or to monitor the forest. And we thought it was interesting to use the technology that often is used for exploitations of forests, to use it as a tool of animation of the forest. When I say animation, I mean it in filmic sense, but also in the literal sense of animating, giving a soul to something that we believe as humans it does not have, which is a tree or a forest. Basically, the film has a voiceover written by a philosopher called Emanuele Coccia, who reversed the perspective that we have the relationship with humans and the tree or the forest. So we don't define the entity who is speaking. It's almost as if it is speaking back to humans and challenging humans to consider if humans are even the dominant species on the planet, or maybe if our trees, questioning the way that trees are still shaping our environment, still shaping our thinking, referring, for instance, to how trees provided branches and wood that without which we would have not developed our thinking or our cognitive system the way it is, because only when we started climbing trees and using branches as tools, we developed our brains as much as we develop our brains, thanks also to be able to cook food and assimilate certain nutrients that otherwise we could have not. That even the airs we breathe is created by plants and trees. So it is a way to conclude the exhibition on a more metaphysical level. So we started in a way from a much more, if not technocratic, at least extremely scientific, extremely pragmatic perspective to a more metaphysical one. At the center of the show, the show was constructed as in a circle. So it was starting in one way and ending with the film I just described. We had two rooms where we developed two different films. One called Cambio, which is a visual essay that narrates the complex relationship between trees and humans, starting from when primordial plants emerged from waters and created the atmosphere we breathe, till the contemporary ecological movements going through colonialism and so on. And another one is something called Seeing the Woods for the Trees, developed in collaboration with Vanessa Richardson from the London Investigation Agency, which is an NGO that is also consulting the European Union. And it's looking at more pragmatically at the definitions of forests and the most common certification scheme present in on the market. These two films, they were intended almost as I would say a central brain that you should look to interpret what is circling around. To conclude, I just want to say that Cambio also, when we opened the exhibition, it was also ready with an archive website that provides a series of papers and materials that we have been reading, a selection of materials we have been reading for the exhibition, and all the interviews we conducted with a variety of different experts, which didn't end up in the exhibition, but they provide an insight on all the knowledge we have been collecting, so to make it available for others. And also during the lockdown, we did also a series of conversation because the exhibition was closed with many of the people who has been extremely kind in supporting the exhibition with their knowledge. And of course, Cambio is also a catalog, which is now at its third edition. The exhibition is also traveling and changing when it's traveling, but it's not also an exhibition. Our idea when we did this work is to show, in a way, also to our commissioners, the way we think and the way we could work also as designers, even maybe within their own companies. In this moment, for instance, we are extending the exhibition and also entering conversation with the company in helping them or challenging them at least in a form of a consultancy on how to think, how they could develop even further their ecological commitment, since it is an amazing company which still has what we call a biome of reference. It is what they do is still based on forestry in Finland, and we are thinking they could be even more involved in the political discourse there on the management of forest, and develop briefs and ways of thinking of their company, briefs for designers, based on the forest and what is useful and interesting for the forest. Since, in a way, it's also what the Altos did at the beginning when they founded the company. Thank you. I'm ready now if you want to. You're welcome.
I know, it's okay. Thank you very much. We will open it up. Prepared some questions, and then we will see how the conversation goes. Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Takuma Johnson. I'm a student at the Berlage. Pick up on something that you were mentioning right at the end of your lecture, related to this idea of the designer having an agency to design more sustainably, and also refer to a project you did on researching e-waste and talking about how the iPhone itself is not actually that innovative. More recently, the right to repair movement has started to gain a lot of momentum. I'm curious, coming from your background as a product designer, if you think that would you have thoughts on how spatial designers or architects could start to take lessons from?
I know what you're referring to when you say that we said that the iPhone is not that innovative. And I think that was also how journalism simplified what we had to say about that. But in a way, it was a bit of a provocation, but what we wanted to say with that is that we also develop our architectures, our objects, our products based on specific ideas of what innovation is, which often is based on providing services or solutions to desires of the user. But if I look from the repairability and recyclability perspective, an object like the iPhone, it is extremely not innovative. So this is how we were framing this discourse. Innovation in this moment, if you think about miniaturizing, for instance, of technology, you know, why are we so much obsessed with miniaturizing? Of course, it's because we make technology much more portable, and by doing so, also much more invasive in our own bodies, I would say. But it is also a way to make it extremely user-friendly, which is fantastic. Nevertheless, user-friendliness is also environmentally sound. So that, just to clarify what we meant when we said the iPhone is not that innovative object. But to go back to your question, well, you know, I have to be honest, I don't have an expertise in architecture, so I don't want to say things that I'm not super knowledgeable of. But I do agree that it is extremely interesting to observe very up close to how, for instance, the rights of repair movement is getting momentum, but also to look into what is happening on a legislation level, because it is true that the rights of repair is becoming more and more, I would say, you know, recognized. But it is not only recognized; it's also supported by. It's becoming more and more supported by legislation and governance. I mean, the European Union, we know it's creating many regulations, sometimes also creating troubles to the citizens instead of solving their problems. But the European Union is also creating many regulations that are improving and creating more boundaries to producers. For instance, we were really, when we have been looking into electronic waste, it is incredible to see how many things could be, I think, improved in design of products if there would be more regulations. So, you know, when we looked into, I can make some examples. And I think this is where architects and designers could even be useful practitioners to be implemented in the creation of legislation and governance. Because of course, we can be much more aware of the way we operate and understanding also what can be done on a product level. Well, instead of being generic and saying, you know, objects should be produced with, you know, materials that are more sustainable or possible to disassemble for repair. Great, that this is already a good direction. We can be more specific. For instance, when we disassemble electronics, the first things you notice is that either you are informed of what you're doing, and so you are a professional in a recycling plant. And let's be honest, not all over the world we have, you know, manual labor that is trained to know how they should treat electronics. You don't know what is hazardous or not. There is not a clear labeling system. It is definitely there for batteries, but there's many other that can be dangerous if you break them even slightly. So we are at this level that, for instance, when we did a project, we were advocating for universal color coding to be applied on components. So to also allow in countries where components are not shredded if they work, components are reused, that those components can be understood clearly if they are dangerous or not. So the right of repair should be there, but I think also more regulations should be implemented that look more closely to what design can do. In terms of architecture, I think there's plenty of inspirations that you can take from this movement, and I think that I don't know if they exist, but I would be definitely enthusiastic to see rights of repairs in architecture, since many of the architectures that are built now, they are built to last for 20 years, which is insane. So for instance, all the discourse of applications of sustainable materials such as timber in architecture, it does not make sense if at the end of the day, an architecture built in wood is not lasting longer than 20 years. Of course, I'm oversimplifying the story, but what I mean to say here is that there's plenty that can be done also on an architectural level, and I think your observation is definitely you know, going the right direction.
Lager. So my question is actually related to the Cambio that you just presented. And in one of your videos, you speak about how the intelligence of non-humans needs to be a part of design conversations. So what is the spectrum of these non-humans that you mentioned, and if this has also influenced any of your other works in the practice that is...
Yeah. I would say this is more a conversation that we are trying to build within in Eindhoven, where we are thinking. I think it is interesting how much, I don't know if you're familiar with the design charts of, for instance, the Bauhaus or many design schools, even Design Academy Eindhoven, since not long ago, it had a chart where there was a man in the middle, a human in the middle, and then all the departments were based around the human. So you had like men and humanity, men and well-being, men and activity, men and mobility, men and whatever, men and living, and so on, which I think it is great to think about design. To me, I guess I'm still very much fascinated by this idea of enlarging the center and make it more inclusive of other species. What does this mean? Well, I don't know yet, because I think we are still at the very early stages, even if there are still already brilliant examples of interventions, for instance, in cities, and thinking how humans and animals can cohabit in architecture. There's plenty of examples in that sense. But I can tell you what we're doing in geodesign, for instance. Since last year, we are working with a conservationist. Her name is Matilde Bernstein. She actually approached us to know if we could work together. So we are trying to have also people that usually are not teaching in design education to enter in conversation with students. And students also question really much if it is even possible to do this, right? How can I put myself in the shoes of another animal, for instance? How can I voice the rights of another species, sorry. How can I do that? So for instance, before the summer, the students were working on a specific location in the Netherlands where there was a project of rewilding. So it was an attempt to reintroduce wild. The students had a client which was an animal, and they were invited to think about, okay, what is the necessity of this animal? Many of the students didn't produce necessarily solutions. Many of them produced also critical works, questioning, for instance, that this is not even possible to do. So I think this is more of a conversation we are having within education. In the coming with the new students, for instance, we as a case study, we are looking at the lagoon in Venice, which is an extremely interesting, case study because, of course, of the extreme conditions of the reality there. And the students will, for instance, visit a producer of not oysters, but similar seashell, and really look at the complex ecosystem there and understanding how design can intervene in that place, thinking not only of what is important for the city and the livelihood of humans, but also of other creatures there, which is an extremely important question in the lagoon ecosystem.
Okay, I actually have another question, but this is, so I was just going through, as you scroll across the images, you see the size of each image. And I just wanted to know if there's a story behind it, or that was just...
Yes, if you click on the screen to respond to your question, and I open the website. So the website, I think if you go in here, the website has been designed to minimize the energy consumption and CO2 emissions that result from navigating the internet. To know more about this, click here. So here you can find the answers to your questions. But basically, the website, we really follow some specific criteria. So we used only Arial and Times New Roman computers, so that whenever you need to look at a computer, you don't need to download specific typeface. Even the what you can call the logo, it's not really a logo, it's not an image, but it's a typeface basically. And if you look at the website in your cell phone, it will not be white, but it will be black, the interface, because Cell phones uses OLED screens, and these screens basically, the more the website, the page is bright, the more they consume energy. So to use less energy, we made the interface in black. The home page, then I get to the images question. The home page, as you see, does not have any image, and it has limited content. The reason why is this, it's because many users ends up sometimes by mistake in a website. And we wanted to make sure that the home page, it's the lightest page on the website. And the images comes in only later in the stages when we have been made your life difficult enough. No, actually, it's not difficult because the site is very clear. Otherwise, you don't see it. With the content, the preview, of course. The images are quite big. So it's not that we made the images small. You know, our work is also extremely visual. So the images are quite big, but you have a preview of the size of the image. Of the average size of the image. I'm not going to explain you what I mean with average, but it's the average size of the image. So you can decide if click forward or not, or at least to give you a hint of the fact that there is a physicality to the images. The infrastructure of the internet is not as light as we might think. And as I said, at the bottom of the page. Yeah, for instance, another things regarding the images. We made, let's say, a selection of images above here, of the one that we think are the most representative, but you have a much more extensive gallery at the bottom. But it's again a way of you can decide if you want to know more, you can click on the images, but they're not all there. So the content of the website is quite extensive. And here, from this link, you can read more of the choices we made. And also you have links to the main source of the knowledge that we use for the building the website, which is the Low Tech magazine, which is helped us in creating a website, and it gives you also possible instructions how to build your own sustainable server powered by solar panels.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
My question is somewhat related to your the previous question or your previous explanation of, basically explaining how things are being made. I was curious how it works with your more tangible work. For example, this nice example of this totem of IKEA stools, which was presented. I'm curious how, let's say, the more workshop-based or craft-based method of working or making stuff works within you and your studio.
How we translate this ecological concern in our practice, or is it more in general how we work?
Well, and then how it translates into like a very cut, and there's joints to be made, and so on and so on.
Is really put into practice. Other times, for instance, when we are working on maybe objects that will not be produced industrially, and they will be like objects for a few clients or in a limited edition and so on. I think I would say that the idea about the object is more important than, let's say that because of the limited nature of the objects, we can be a bit more free. I feel less guilty if I do or in eight pieces than if I have to many more, right? So the moment in which I think or the collaboration with a producer, with a company. So it's not a small scale production, but with a company. That for us has been the most fulfilling so far, but it hasn't been published. And I don't even know if it will be published because it has been more of a consultancy that will lead in any case to an exhibition or to the extension of Cambio. It's this collaboration with HArquitectes that I mentioned before, where basically what we did, I can tell you what happened. Basically, they reached out to us before the opening of the exhibition, asking if they could be somehow helpful, if they could support the exhibition, or in-depth conversation, because we were always interested in art tech. Because there's very few companies they still can claim to have their production linked to a specific extraction location. In their case, it's forests in Finland because of this deep link. And because we think we could, working with them, possibly really show the way we have of thinking of how designer could work with companies in their ecological development. But they're not necessarily, they're not IKEA, they're not huge. So it's not that they have necessarily concern, they do everything by themselves. But so in a way, what we provided for them is we acted almost as an external R&D. And they gave us all the information we wanted regarding the chains of custody of their materials. We visited their production facilities. We visited the forests where they extract. We visited their sawmills. We interviewed people working for them. We even, and of course, in parallel to that, we studied how the reality of forestry in Finland is, which is extremely complex reality because the main industry is paper extraction. To the point that the trees that HArquitectes uses are the one clear cut for the production of paper, and then they take out the hardwood, which are birch trees, but they come from clear cutting for the production of process of paper. So with them, we are thinking, okay, what can we do? How can we rethink or help you think about your company in these terms? And I guess being extremely interested in the durability of their product. Even now, they have a very good program where they gather vintage pieces of HArquitectes, they restore them, they reintroduce them in the market. We propose them, and I make you only this example because I cannot necessarily share everything else that we've been discussing. We said, listen, your birch trees, they will grow for at least 60 to 80 years to produce your stools. I think you should have offer to your clients a warranty that is based on the rotational time of cutting of trees, which is 80 years. So for instance, this is something we're working with them, and many other strategies that we propose. We even, for instance, at one point we gave them a provocation. The majority of citizens in Finland owns a piece of forest for historical reasons that I don't tell you why. But many Finnish people owns forest. So we asked them, how many people working for you owns forest, and who is managing this forest? Because the majority of companies who offers expertise on the management of forest are huge paper corporations that, of course, tell you that you should become somebody that consults citizens on how to manage their forests, not based on clear cutting. Because as a company, you don't need that. You don't need to support this kind of industry. So this is practice what we advocate with the exhibition. But to make it clear, we are also a commercial design studio, so we also make huge compromises. And sometimes we design things, we enter in conversations with companies, we try to challenge them. We try to work with companies that we believe they are doing a great job, but not always we can be as challenging as with HArquitectes.
Thank you. In any case, it sounds exciting to...
Amazing,
yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
And,
but also, again, it's the right company.
Cool.
Hello. Maybe this is more of a personal thing, a personal question, but, well, it seems very clear to me, at least, from all the work that you've been showing us, or all the work you've done over the years, even the little details on your website, like making it more sustainable, that in an ethical point of view, you are deeply committed to sustainability. But when you, in your project Cambio, you were talking about trees, with that universal declaration of the rights of trees, and saying things like, what if trees are the dominant species on this planet, and we as humans take a lot from them, et cetera, et cetera. It began to feel almost as if, well, it reminded me of people who live by the sea, who have a deep respect for the ocean, and really respect the sea, or the thing that they live by and they take from. And I'm curious to know for you, and for maybe almost a spiritual reverence developed over time as you've researched so many things concerning sustainability for you?
I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I think sometimes we're also extremely pragmatic. On the other side, since a few years, at least a few years ago, I mean, we do have an ecological concern because I think we feel that we do feel that the planet is fragile. We know, we just feel it also. I don't want to be metaphysical, but it's just like, you know, because you are building the world, you are designing it. So for us, the ethical questions that we have, they do not come necessarily because this is the way we have been growing up, or because we are who we are. They come because we are designers. And you face these ethical questions if you like it or not. They are in front of you. I mean, it's almost as if you are a doctor and you understand your patient is sick. You cannot avoid of the person is in front of you. But on the other side, I also think that we don't perceive the ecological concern, the ecological problem, is also an extremely interesting intellectual challenge for designers that we haven't seen, I think, since ages. I think, at least in the Western world, you know, it's probably the last exciting moment. It was probably a reconstruction after the Second World War. And I think in this moment, design and architecture should be tools for healing the relationship we have with the environment. Yeah, I mean, I guess these more experimental works that we do, or research-based one, they are our answer to work with. And sometimes we cannot find the answers there. And so we use our independent practice to develop them further. But I don't think we necessarily develop a reverence. I don't think it is that. But we're definitely much more aware of our interconnection with other species. And we definitely find it sometimes touching to see. I mean, we definitely have a different relationship with animals and other beings in this moment in our life compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
And we look forward to meeting you in person at some point.
Bye.